This is Line Talkers Podcast, Episode 4, Highline Cowboy, the lineman behind the music. A couple times a year, I leave Orlando and make my way back up to home, back up to Tennessee. And unless I fly directly into Chattanooga, our route takes us right up the turnpike to 75, all the way up through Atlanta into Chattanooga. Not sure if you've ever driven through Atlanta or not, but it's similar to other cities that you've driven through probably. Always a lot of traffic and always construction. When I drove through this time, traffic was no different. It was raining. It was on a Friday night. When I get back into Atlanta, I start to see familiar territory, and with that, I start thinking about my time in Atlanta. I spent about almost 2 years working in Atlanta and got to meet a lot of people. One of the people that I met while working in Atlanta, I'm getting ready to introduce you to. His name's Brandon Wiley. He was a lineman on my team for just a very short period before he left to take other opportunities. When I gave Brandon a call, I honestly was surprised that he had time to talk to me. Brandon's a pretty busy guy. Brandon currently serves as Training and Safety Director for the Electric Cities of Georgia. It's an organization that supports all the municipals in Georgia with their training and safety. They also do work in Florida and the Virgin Islands that we'll hear about. Brandon's a father, husband, lives about an hour outside of Atlanta. He travels a lot, on the road constantly. Brandon's also a musician. Brandon plays about 5 or 6 shows a month. I was able to get him to sit down with me and talk just a few minutes about his career and about his music. For those who don't know, I used to work with Brandon. I took over an electric department where Brandon worked as a lineman, and he liked me being his boss so much that he quit like 2 months after I started.
Yeah, I could tell it was time to go.
Hey, I remember that day actually like it was yesterday when you came to me, because I think I'd approached you for helping me out with some stuff, and you're like, hey, I want to let you know what's in the works. But hey, it worked out for the both of us, I think, in the end.
Yes, it did. Yeah, it was all for the best. And it was nothing personal, I promise. Brandon Wiley, born and raised in Western Georgia, been here all my life. All my family's from the area, so I kind of stuck around. 43 years old. I've lived a wonderful life. I've got 2 boys, 1 son and 1 stepson. They're 15 and 16. I got a beautiful wife, Emily. Wonderful place to live. I'm telling you, life really couldn't get much better than it is right now.
That's awesome. I was drove through Atlanta last weekend, and I thought about you when I passed through Marietta. And when I looked online, I didn't realize you live in, what's the name of the town you live in? Tallapoosa?
Tallapoosa, yes.
Tallapoosa?
As far west in Georgia as you can go without going to Alabama.
How did you get started in that trade, Brandon, in line work? How did you get started?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story because you would think as passionate as I am about line work is that it would have been one of those things that I just wanted to do all my life and my heart was set on it, but it was really the exact opposite of that. I'm a second generation lineman. My dad retired from Greystone Power here in Douglasville, Georgia. Growing up, I was around it all my life. He was as passionate about being a lineman as I am now. But as a kid, it was Dad's gone a lot. Dad's on trouble calls, and I got to take a few rides in the bucket truck, but I wanted to go a different direction. I wanted to do my own thing, and I tried a few things. I went to college for 3 years, and there was just really nothing there for me, so I took a couple of odd and end jobs, and I ended up at a place in Douglasville that sells mortar and bricks and sand and those sort of things, and really wasn't making that much money. I hated my boss. My dad finally came to me one day and he said, look, let me just get you on with Pike Electric. They were contracting for Greystone at that time. So let me just get you a job. He said, just try it. He said, you may hate it. If you hate it, quit. It's fine, whatever, but just give it a shot. And he caught me on a really bad day. So I said, fine, yeah, let's do it. About 2 weeks later, he got me on with Pike, and I showed up, and first day on the job, I show up at the lot, and I find the general foreman. He gives me all my stuff, and he walks me over to. He said, "I'm going to show you your crew. I'm going to introduce you to your foreman." And as we're walking up, there's probably about 10 or 15 guys kind of in a circle, and there's two guys in the middle in a wrestling match. And one big guy body slams the other guy down on the rocks, and they wrestle around for a minute. And I'm standing there going, "Oh dear Lord, what have I gotten myself into?"
Yeah.
And the
Welcome to
general
line
foreman
work in
kind
the
of
South.
exactly the
Yeah.
general foreman kind of nudges me. He said, "Well, you see the guy on the bottom there?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, that's your foreman. As a matter of fact, that's your lineman on top of him that just body slammed him." So they got up and dusted themselves off and introduced themselves, and we got out to the job site. And man, I'm telling you, it was day number one that I realized, what have I been waiting on? Why has it taken me so long to find this? And really from there, it was just I loved it ever since. And I found where I was supposed to be, and just kind of went from there.
That was pretty common in the South.
Oh yeah,
That kind of, I guess, safety folks now would call it horseplay. I
right.
think
Yeah.
they called it fun and camaraderie back in the day. So you told me a little bit about yourself, where you live, how you got started in the trades. Tell me a little bit about your progression in the industry. You know, you started with Pike as a contractor, I assume as a groundsman, a grunt, and then you worked your way up to lineman. Tell us a little bit about that progression and where you ended up now.
Yeah, so I started out at Pike at the bottom, a truck driver. I didn't even have a CDL driver's license at that time. Worked my way through equipment operator and then apprentice lineman with Pike. Only spent 2 years there before I went to Marietta, and that was around 2000 when I went to Marietta. So I started there as their classification at that time. The only opening they had was a groundman 2. So I took it, even though it was a little bit of a cut and pay and not exactly what I'd hoped for. I was really wanting to get into the apprentice level, but so I went in, spent some time at Grauman with Marietta, and then moved to apprentice. At that time, it was distribution services under MEAG Power. They were doing an apprenticeship program through TVPPA. That was around 2001. I started into the apprenticeship program, and really that's where I decided where I needed to be. It was that the first lab of the apprenticeship that really set me on the path I'm on now. I loved the training aspect of it. I loved being in the safety and seeing the training and being a part of the training. And I'd already participated in some rodeos at that point. So when I went to the school, they let me help out with some of the guys that were a little more inexperienced climbers. I went through 3 years there, graduated from the apprenticeship, moved up to journeyman lineman with Marietta. 2 years at that classification, and then made first class lineman. And then it wasn't too long after I made first class, maybe about a year and a half after I made first class lineman, that I got the opportunity to apply for training position with distribution services. I didn't really think I would get it. I didn't know that if I had the experience at that time to get that position, but decided to go for it. Ended up landing the job. That was about the time that you were there, and so you kind of know a little bit of that story at that point. But so when I went to distribution services, we actually spun off and became our own company, which is what it is now, Electric Cities of Georgia, in 2009. Helped with the apprenticeship program there, did safety meetings throughout the state of Georgia, moved up to assistant director a few years ago, and then actually this year got promoted to director of training and safety with Electric Cities of Georgia.
Oh,
So that's kind of
congratulations. I was not
yeah,
aware of that.
thanks. John Beasley, who was my boss, got promoted to vice president, and that opened up a pathway for me to become director. So that's kind of where I'm sitting at now.
Well, I knew when you came to me that you were going to be successful, no matter where you went. And in my career, I've tried not to selfishly. I want people to stay, but I know that best thing that you can ever do is to encourage people to go be who they're supposed to be and make a difference. You've done that. One more question before we get to the reason I wanted to talk to you. Why safety and training, and what makes you a good fit for that part? Because we both know that coming up in the industry that we know a lot of training and safety people that are in the wrong roles. They're in their
Oh yeah,
own
yeah,
jobs.
yeah.
But, and you know, there's a couple that come to mind. We're not going to name any names, but
Right. Yeah.
none that I work with now. I will tell you that. But in the past. But what makes you a good fit, Brandon, for that?
I think it goes back to my dad, just being around him because he was very much about safety. He never got into a safety position. He retired as a supervisor. He started as a groundman, worked his way up to lineman and foreman and supervisor. When I started, that's all he talked to me about was safety and making sure I wore my rubber gloves and making sure I had my hard hat on and making sure I did things the right way. And I know for a fact that he talked to my foreman and he knew my lineman really well also. And I know that they talked and that he made sure that they watched after me also. But every time something came up or we would start talking shop a little bit around the dinner table, the conversation always revolved around safety. We would talk about the jobs and how we were doing the jobs, but then it would always get into safety. So that was kind of instilled in me at a very young age and very early on. And then when I sat in on the safety meetings that we had at Marietta, those guys would come in. I always thought that was interesting. And then again, when I went to that first apprentice lab and I saw the training part of it and I saw how safety tied into training, I just loved it. I just loved that part of it. And you never know until you really do it, but I just always thought I think I could be good at this. I think this is kind of where I could be. I think my music career has kind of helped me with that. I don't get really nervous in front of a group of people. I just don't. That's just playing in front of the people I've played in front of is I kind of treat it the same way when I go in to do a meeting. I treat it almost like a show, and I'm there to give them some information and hopefully keep them safe and also entertain them a little bit. That's how I approach safety.
I think that's important. You can bore people to tears when you're
Oh God,
up
I've
in
been
front of a
there.
group, whether you're in a safety meeting or training, church, or a
Yeah,
concert
yeah.
or whatever. But so the great segue you led into, you talked about your music a little bit. I'll be honest with you. When I worked with you, I never knew you were a musician. First of all, I didn't know you lived so far away from the shop at the time. You had a hall.
Well, I
Did
was a
you
little
live there
closer
then?
then. I was not
Okay.
in Tallapoosa then. I was probably 30 minutes closer to Marietta than I am
Okay.
now.
All right. And then second, I didn't know you played music. I didn't know you played music until we both left there. And then Facebook came around shortly after that, and I
Yeah.
connected with a bunch of folks that I work with there.
Yep.
When did you start to play music? Have you always done that as well?
I've always been around it. I didn't pick up a guitar and start to learn until really about the time I started at Pike. Around the same time. I was about 21 years old. Kind of to go back a little bit, my grandfather, my dad, my uncles, my mom even, she plays, but my grandfather is a highly renowned mandolin player and is known for kind of helping start the bluegrass movement in the Atlanta area. He was in a group called the Bluegrass Five. They played festivals and events all over the Southeast, and I would travel with them to go to these things. And I got to see him on stage. I even have pictures of me when I was 5 years old up on stage. I couldn't play anything, but I had a mandolin in my hand, and I pretended like I could play. But I loved it. I loved being on stage, and they would have to run me off. They would have to kick me off the stage because I would just stay there the whole time. And then after that I kind of got into sports a little more. I played football and baseball and basketball, and I became an athlete. Put the music away for a little while, and then once I started at Pike and I started in the line work, I had some friends that played music, and that helped me to get that interest back. And we would sit around campfires and play songs and go to parties, and guitars would always come out and we would start playing. So that's kind of how it started. It's been with me all my life, but it took me a little bit longer to really accept it and grasp it and run with it, I guess, than it does some folks.
I see on social media you play a lot of shows. How many gigs do you do a month? Man, you look like every single weekend you're playing somewhere.
Not anymore. I went through a period where I was playing almost every single weekend, and it's challenging to play that much. So I'm as busy as I want to be. I could play more if I wanted to, but I'm kind of at a point right